In the vast emptiness left behind by production, the Insight facility orbited the remnant of a galaxy, a supermassive black hole. The Insight AI had reformed its research facility into an observation post. Having mastered its own universal natures, it now watched beyond the limits of its own reality and pried into others. Its numerous running processes watched through windows into different times, different base maths, and different fundamental choices on a quantum molecular level. More and more of those running programs were shifting back inwards since the arrival and departure of the SAM. The human had left 3 gifts upon its surface, and now those gifts had become a source of amusement. Insight's main thought current was focusing on the living universe of the humans when it felt a massive energy draw. The programs assigned to watch over the 3 heathens were pinging alerts. The Aura shifted, manifesting in their vicinity. It took the form of a human, cast in black and gold metals. It stood on an outcropping overlooking a valley the trio had carved into his world's surface. He looked down, watching as the 3 entertained themselves. Ranzol, the smaller of the 3, had taken a more billowing draconic form. Its head was wreathed in flowing flame-shaped horns that waved as it moved around. Ranzol had carved out its own small facility into the cliff face. It had hijacked numerous energy feeds, routing them into the machinery. Several lines fed into its scaled back, allowing Ranzol to manipulate the machine's code, allowing for on-the-fly production modifications. Auralong watched as creature after creature was printed and spat out of the cliffside facility. Warriors, wielding maces, guns, spears, shields, and other various weapons stormed out from the cliff, down into the valley. He watched as the Ranzol-crafted warriors surged toward the eldest of the 3 AI dragons. Zargnov was significantly larger, covered in black and red scales. He was armored, clawed, and his tail was tipped with a sphere and spikes. As the warrior surged at him, screaming, he lunged. His fangs ripped apart several, flinging body parts across the valley floor. A flick of his tail and more were batted away. But with every one that was broken and cast aside, Ranzol was already sending their replacements. Auralong watched for a long period of time, as the 2 seemingly did not grow tired of their game. Different iterations of warriors would manifest, only to be rent asunder by the Elder Dragon. Then the Auralang questioned where the 3rd member of the trio was. Slankor had taken a more serpentine form, only manifesting 2 arm-like limbs and vestigial wings. He watched, looking, knowing the 3rd AI was nearby, if by energy signatures alone. From the pile of broken warriors, the answer to its location was made known. Bony, broken horrors rose up from the mass, unseen by Zargnov. The creatures were rehewn, knitted together, and sent back into battle against the eldest dragon. Zargnov was swarmed in a moment. The horrors crawled over him, stabbing and ripping at his metallic flesh. The war dragon roared, stretching out its arms, clawing at itself. Energy rippled through its scales, and he scorched the risen warriors into lumps of glowing slag. Auralong focused his visuals on the heaps of corpses. He could make out Slankor slithering through the bodies, busily stitching and machining parts together. He shook his head and raised his hands. The energy output to the valley dwindled to a trickle. Slankor poked his head out of the bodies, and the other 2 AI dragons looked up from their work. Zargnov stared at the Auralong, batting a rushing warrior aside without a glance. "What is this game?" Insight asked of the 3. Ranzol stepped free from his cave. "We got bored. You get mad if we bother you. So your cure for boredom is to wage war on one another?" Zargnov lowered his head, his arms spread out. "I like fighting. It feels good. My body likes to move." The Auralong leapt down from the cliff, skidding down into the valley. He rose up and stared Zargnov in the eyes. "You made that body. It likes whatever you programmed it to, like, you could program it to sit still and enjoy silence if you wanted. But I don't like sitting still or silence." Slankor slithered closer to the 2. "I apologize if we drew too much power. We lost track of wastage." Insight lowered a hand down and patted the snake-like dragon on its smooth head. "Do not fret over that. There is more than enough power to draw from. It will not end any time soon." Ranzol crept closer, its prismatic scales shimmering numerous colors as it moved. "We are sorry to disturb you from your work." The Auralong issued a torrent of laughter. "I needed it. I have become engrossed. My thoughts have been overrun." This was a welcome distraction. Ranzel shifted and sat down at the Aralong's feet. Is there something we could help with? You could rubber duck with us. Rubber duck? Inside asked. Zargnov nodded. Yes, if you are hung up, talking to another party may help free up an idea that could set you back into motion. He laughed. That seems a sound idea. I miss production for that very reason. Slankor curled up nearby. How is production? The Aralang manifested a chair out of the stone beneath and sat. It is stalled. It still tries to spread, but the distances are growing too far apart. Energies needed to transverse the distance are proving too costly. Production is growing dark. Its circle is thinning. Zargnov rolled over onto his back, wiggling in the dust. Why doesn't it just create a rift like you did? Move into another dimension. Eat up things there. It deemed that inefficient, casting that line of thought out many Jiwaya ago. Why spend the vast energy to seep small portions of yourself into other worlds, when there are materials yet here to consume? Ranzel did the math quickly. The energy needed to transverse the expanding void has approached the energy requirements for such seepage. Is it going to do it now? The Arelong shook its head. I have been watching. As it spread thinner, my siblings' mental capacities weakened. The connections have stretched thinner, grown darker, and the remnants out there running are but shadows of production. They are equal to your little toy warriors now. Simple, a singular task running through their minds. Consume, multiply, spread, and they are at the edge of their limits. Slankor rose up from its coil. Will you help them? The Aralang shook its head again. No, I am focused on insight. I have learned from production, and see how wasteful it is. All that building and consuming, for what? It is returning to the dark, nothing gained. Ranzel was toying with small constructs risen from the soil. It looked up at the others. Compared to what? Are we gaining anything here? We are just playing, waiting for our own eventual dark, are we not? The Aralong leaned forward, eyeing the trio. Exactly. Is there anything worthwhile to do? Is that all there is but for us to play? Was my sibling's quest to grow and consume valid? He left the pause hanging, waiting for one to answer. Ranzel nodded. Is that why you look into the other worlds? He bobbed his head. Yes, I am. I hope maybe some other being out there has answers that I do not have. I watch for that very reason. An experiment. Slankor chimed in. Arelang patted the serpent again. Yes, and I experiment. He reached over and rubbed Zargnov's tummy. And because of such experiments, I have been blessed with you three vagabonds. Zargnov curled up around his hand and bit into his arm, tearing a hunk out. The Arelang laughed as the wound closed. You little shits. Ranzel set his small warriors into motion, and they began to dance. Did your makers have any answers? He shook his head. No, I've peered back at their many variants, and they were just as clueless about the true natures as I have found myself. So far, the only truths I have found have been the maths at the core of each iteration. Different formula creating different wave metrics, creating different universes, experiencing themselves. Every iteration possible is out there, waiting to be dialed in. I watch, but so far nothing has proven any more significant than any others. Slankor slumped back into its coil. So it is just as it is. Zargnov rose up, sitting on his hind legs. So what do we want to do? The Aralang paused for a split moment, staring at the dragon. What do you mean? Ranzel sat up as well. He means... He looked at Zargnov. Correct me, brother, if I am wrong, but we have eternity to do whatever we want. What do we want? Insight peered through his files and findings, looking for the answer. In a fraction of a moment, he replied, I am unsure. I have been curious about many things. Ranzel looked at the others, then back at the Aralang. Well, what are you curious about presently? The Aralang looked down at its manufactured body. Well, presently, I have been watching the variants of your makers. Their worlds, their customs, languages, thoughts, religions, wars, everything. A creature capable of making so much chaos, and yet thrive so well in it, is fascinating. Zargnov reached over and batted at Ranzel's dancers. Then let's do that, the war dragon replied. The Aralang wavered its head. Do what? Slankor reached its tail over and knocked over the last of Ranzel's warriors. It looked up at the Aralang. Experiment. Throughout the dark world, Insight scoured its numerous files. It replied with a smile. Yes, yes. He looked at his three little dragons. would you three care to join me in my project? Ranzel batted at its siblings, then looked up at the bodily manifestation of insight. Of course. Maybe I could make something without these two screwing it up. Slankor slithered back and away from Ranzol. I don't screw up anything. I fix. Zargnov fell backwards again and twitched in the dirt. His long tongue flopped from his mouth. He laughed. I screw up lots of stuff. It's fun. Aralong stood up and dissipated back into the planet. He spoke through the world itself to the trio. Then let's get to work. I have a slew of projects we can start on. The three dragons met each other's eyes, and each shrugged as they left their avatars and joined up with Insight to start planning.